Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Beitzah Daf Lamed Beis. We begin in the Mishnah halfway through the first Amud. The Mishnah will list a number of items you're not allowed to create on Yom Tov because you are creating or fixing a kli. 3 items. One is a machlokas. Gemara will describe who is the author of this Mishnah, who does it fit in. We'll have 2 possibilities. We'll explain why each of these is a tikkun. We'll have a little bit of a garata, a list of people who live a very painful existence. Then we'll get to another Mishnah, which will discuss when you are allowed to clean ovens, when you're allowed to break kalim and make things out of them. And the Gemara following that, we'll get into the halachas of OL. When can you lay one item on top of 2 smaller items, even though you're creating a roof of sorts? So let's begin our daf. The Mishnah says that there are 3 things which are forbidden because you're fixing or creating a kli. Number 1 is a ner. That refers to the cup, the clay cup, which you will fill with oil in order to make a candle out of that. So making the cup, so what you did is you took a ball of clay and you stuck your fist in it, Rashi says, and you hollowed it out. You made it into a bowl shape. So making that bowl shape, that's creating a kli, so that's forbidden. Next thing is making a coal, making bricks of coal, which you could use to light fires. That's also forbidden because that's called a kli. It's usable as a fire lighter. The Gemara will explain what you could do with that on Yom Tov. And the third thing is a machlokes. Machlokes between Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda. That is whether or not you're allowed to cut a wick. The Tanna Kama says you're not allowed to cut a wick because you're creating a useful wick. And Rabbi Yehuda says you're allowed to cut it with fire. You can't cut it with a knife, but you're allowed to take a flame to snip it into 2. The Gemara will explain why that's permitted. So let's begin. Our Gemara. The Gemara wants to know who is the author of this Mishnah. It says that if you hollow out clay into a shape of a bowl, that's already considered made a finished kli. The Gemara says that the simplest understanding would be that that's not a finished kli. Whenever you make something out of clay, it's not finished until you bake it in a kiln. You have to make the shape and then you have to harden it. Can't do much with it until you harden it. So somebody here in our Mishnah seems to hold that just by shaping it is already considered finished. So the Gemara wants to know who is that. So the Gemara is going to offer 2 suggestions. Either it's Rabbi Meir or it's Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok. The Gemara has to find where each of them say this halacha, and the Gemara will have a kasha on it and the same answer for each of them. Now, what is the area of halacha where we'll find that these 2 Tanaim hold that it's considered to be a finished kli by just shaping it? So it's not going to be in Hilchos Yom Tov, it's going to be in Hilchos Tumah. The halacha is that something is mekabel tumah, it is susceptible to become tameh from such time as it is finished, as it is a useful kli. And these 2 Tanaim is where we'll hold that something which is already shaped into a bowl is already considered useful even before you fire it in the kiln. So where do you see Rabbi Meir holding it? Sumar quotes Rabbi Meir, who says in a Beitzah that any earthenware kli is mekabel tumah from the time that it is finished. That implies where the shape is finished. And Yeshua argues there and says no, it first has to be fired in the kiln. So you see, Rabbi Meir holds it doesn't have to be fired in the kiln. That's Gemara's first approach. We'll get to the kasha when we see the second approach. The second approach is that it's Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok. He is talking about what the Gemara calls alphasin charnios. The Gemara says that that's also known as arnios, which the Gemara says is also known as tzaichak liyaisa, which it turns out are plates, big wide plates, that are used by people who live in small villages where they don't have very nice kalim, so they use this as a kli, even though all it is a big fat plate, so a big flat plate. So what it is it's a flat sheet of clay, and it's rounded, and it is not hollowed. It doesn't contain anything within it. Now, generally, the halacha of a kli cheres is that it's only mekabel tumah through its inside area. That means it has a hollowed out area, and it's mekabel tumah by something touching it in its hollowness, in its inner space. This thing doesn't have an inner space, so therefore it can't be mekabel tumah. But that's only tumas mace and other similar types of tumah. So this kli definitely cannot be mekabel tumah in an OL, in a room with a mace in it, because it doesn't have an internal area. However, the tumah called heset azav, where it's moved by a zav or carried by a zav, that's you don't need to have a hollow for that. You're susceptible for that, even if you have no hollow if you're a kli cheres. So the machlokes here between Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok and the Tanna Kama in a Beitzah is, can this flat plate be mekabel tumas heset zav? And the Tanna Kama says yes, and Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok says no. The Gemara understands, why does Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok say no? Obviously, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok says it's not finished yet because it's not hollowed yet. Now, the Tanna Kama who says yes, says, well, it makes no difference if it's hollowed or if it's not hollowed. It's able to be makabel tomas zav because you don't need to have a hollow for that. Rav Tzadok though says it's not finished yet, but its implication is, though, the reason it's not finished is because it's not hollowed. If it would be hollowed, it would be considered finished, even though it's not fired in the kiln yet. So there, you see, that's another Tana who holds that something which is in its final hollowed shape is considered finished, even though it's not fired in the kiln yet. Now, the the same kasha on both the approach that this mission is Rabbi Meir and the approach that it's Elazar Tzadok, and that is that they're talking about a kli which is large and has uses. You can fill it up with all kinds of items. This small thing, though, is a ner. It's a tiny bowl that's just used to hold oil. That has no function until it's fired, because you can't put liquid in it until it's fired. Now, if you want to use it as a candle to hold oil, you have to fire it first. But what are you going to put into it? There's no item small enough that you can put into it, so it's not useful at this point. So maybe Reb Meir and Reb Elazar hold that something which is hollowed is already a couple times even before it's fired. That's if it's large enough to hold fruits or something. But this tiny thing, what are you going to do with it? So the Meir says, no, you could put coins in it, and therefore it is useful. And therefore, it's no different than the larger kli, and therefore these are the two sources. Either of these two could fit into our Mishnah. Okay, next, the Gemara analyzes the line in the Mishnah that says that you can't make coal bricks. So Gemara says, of course you can't make coal bricks on Yantif. Coal bricks have no use on Yantif. The only thing we would consider to be possible, that would be permitted to make on Yantif, would be something that you could use for Yantif. What are you going to do with coal bricks on Yantif? Gemara says you may need it to give to people in charge of heating water. So they could heat water for a bath or for a mikvah or something. So Gemara says, why would I think you're allowed to do that? You're not allowed to take a hot bath on Yantif. So Gemara says, well, there was a time when people were allowed to sweat. They were allowed to heat up the water so that they could vaporize it and people could go in there and have a shvitz. That was at some point forbidden by a decree that people were ending up using the bathhouse while they were doing that. But this Mishnah is from before that time, and therefore the shvitz was permitted. And therefore, you may think that you're allowed to make these coal bricks so that you can make the shvitz heat up so that people could go in there. The Mishnah comes to teach you that's forbidden because it's considered to be making a kli. You're making these bricks into a kli. The Gemara now moves on to analyze the last halacha, which is that you are allowed to, at least according to one opinion, you are allowed to cut a wick into 2 wicks with a flame. The Gemara says, why would you be allowed to do it with a flame and not with a knife? What's the difference? Either way, you're making a wick into 2 wicks. You're being metaken money. You're creating 2 new useful objects. So Gemara answers, what's happening here is that you're taking one long wick, you're sticking each end into a lamp, meaning each end into a clay pot of oil, and then you're going to light the middle of it so it'll burn through it and make 2 wicks that way. And that's permitted because it does not look like you're trying to make 2 wicks. It looks like you're just trying to light a flame. And Gemara brings a Beitzah that says that exact case, that is what is permitted. Now the Gemara brings a few halachos that are related. First one comes from Rav Nosson bar Abba, named Rav, who says you're allowed to break off the bits of coal that form on the end of a wick while it's burning and they blacken the flame. You're allowed to take those off in Yantif. That is permitted. Gemara quotes Chanina bar Shalmaya, who says Brysa over from Bar Kapara, who says that there are 6 halachos in a wick, 3 kulas and 3 chumras, 3 that are strict rules and 3 that are lenient rules. The 3 strict rules are you're not allowed to twist it in the first place on Yantif, that's making it kli. You're not allowed to singe it, that's also completing it. And you're not allowed to cut it into 2. The 3 leniencies are you're allowed to press it together with your hand, you're allowed to soak it in oil, that's part of completing it, but that's permitted, and you're allowed to cut it with a flame, like we said before, as long as you put each end in a clay lamp. Now, having mentioned Rav Nosson bar Abba, the name of Rav, the Gemara quotes a few the statements of Rav Nosson bar Abba, the name of Rav. First of all, he said that the rich people in Bavel are going to Gehenna because Rashi explains they don't share, they don't give tzedakah. Gemara proves this with a story of somebody by the name of Shabsai bar Marinus who went to Bavel and he asked the rich people there to help him set up a business, share some merchandise with him so that he could sell and he'll split the profits with them, and they refused. And then he asked them at least for some food. They didn't want to give him that either. So he said these people must be descended from the Erev Rav, the people, the Egyptians who left Egypt together with the Jewish people. It can't be that they're from Klal Yisrael, because the pasuk says in Dvarim v'nasan l'cha rachamim v'richamcha, Hashem will give you mercy and He will make you merciful, and therefore anybody who is from the descendants of Avraham Avinu is merciful. And anybody who does not have mercy on the nations must not be descended from Avram Avinu. Gemara says further, Rav Nosson Rabba also said, anybody who depends on other people for food, he's always looking to another's table for food, he lives in a dark world, like the pasuk says in Eov. Nodiru lalechem, somebody's wandering for bread. Aye yoda ki nachon biyodo yom choshech. He has a day of blackness. Rav Chisda says he has no life. We see a Beitzah that there are three people whose lives are not lives, and they are somebody who's looking to his friend for bread, somebody who is ruled by his wife, and somebody who is ruled by troubles that cause him pain. Now, some say that there's a fourth, and that somebody only owns one piece of clothing. Gemara says that's because he can't clean it, he can't wash it, therefore it gets full of lice, and the lice bite him. But the Tanna Kama didn't list that one because he has a solution, he could potentially pick off the lice. Okay, this ends Gemara's comments on the Mishnah. Now we get to our next Mishnah. The next Mishnah continues to list items which you're not allowed to create or situations which you're not allowed to set up because of the Yisr of Mataki and Mana, creating a fixed situation or device or system. On Yantav, the first one is you're not allowed to place broken pottery shards or pieces of paper on the bars of a grill in order to grill fish on Yom Tov. You might want to put those things on at the top of the bars of the grill, because otherwise the bars, when they heat up, will burn the fish. But you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to put those things on the fish. You're also not allowed to clean out ashes in the bottom of an oven or a stove. But you are allowed to press them down so that you could put something inside there to bake. You're not allowed to put two barrels next to each other with intent to put a pot over it. That means to say you want to set a pot suspended over a fire, so you intend to put two barrels near each other. You'll put the pot suspended from edge to edge on top, and you'll build a fire under it. You're not allowed to do that. You're also not allowed to hold a pot up with pieces of wood. Again, similar style. You're also not allowed to use a door. The Gemara will explain what that means. That'll be on the next stuff. You're also not allowed to drive an animal with a stick. The Gemara is going to understand that means you're creating a tool with the stick. Rabbi Elazar Shimon holds that that's permitted. Okay, now the Gemara says the reason for all these is because you are fixing a device, either creating a device or fixing a device. Now, as far as clearing out a stove or an oven by scooping out the burnt out ashes, the Gemara says Rav Chia bar Yosef said in front of Rav Nachman, it's impossible to bake in the current situation, then you are allowed to, because that's a malacha you have to do for Ochel Nefesh, and therefore you're allowed to. Now the Gemara quotes an incident here that Rav Chia's daughter had a brick that fell into her oven on Yom Tov, and Rav Chia said, I like my bread to be very fine, meaning to tell her that she's allowed to clear it out, but she needs to remove it in order to bake. Similarly, the Gemara says that Rava told his servant, roast a goose for me, and be careful it doesn't get burnt. Again, he meant to say you can scoop out what's at the bottom so that it shouldn't burn, it shouldn't touch the goose and cause it to burn. Now the Gemara says, Ravina asked Rav Ashi, I heard from Rav Achav Hutzel from Sharkin that I heard that you smear the inside of your oven with mud in order to seal up the cracks, so that when you roast it, air doesn't get in. Rashi explains air messes up the roasting. So how are you allowed to do that? You're finishing off your oven. So he answered, he said, I live on the banks of the Pras River, the Euphrates River, and there's already sad mud there. Now what happened was like this. The smearing of the mud, the problem is that you're mixing mud and water, sand and water together, you're making that into a paste. That's an Isser of lush. So he answered, and he said, there's a very nice pile of clay here and mud already prepared on the side of the river. Therefore I don't have to mix anything, and so I'm allowed to use it. He just pointed out that in order to do that, you have to set aside the mud before Yom Tov begins. You have to section off an area and say, this is what I'm preparing to use. Otherwise, it's muktzah. And Ravina also says, if you wanted to use ash and mix it with water, that you are allowed to do, because ash doesn't mix well with water. It doesn't make a paste. It just kind of makes a suspension. Okay, now, further in the Mishnah, we had seen that you cannot put two barrels together and suspend something over the top. That's an oel. You're creating a roof. Anytime you have a object suspended over the space between two other objects, that's a roofed structure. Even if it's only temporary, it's an Isser D'Rabbanan. It's the Isser of oel. So Gemara quotes Rav Nachman, who said that you're allowed to put two stones together to make a toilet. That's there's a little space between them. You set them up. You're moving them near each other so you could sit on them and have a space between them that allows a person to relieve himself and have the waste material drop away. So Gemara asked that Rabbah asked Rav Nachman that you're not allowed to move 2 barrels in order to put a pot on top of them. So how come you're allowed to move these 2 stones? So he said, it's different over there. You're having a roof, you're having something on top. Here you're just moving 2 stones. You're not putting anything on top. So Gemara said, does that mean that you're allowed to cement 2 stones into place in order to make it a seat? A place to sit on? No, so Gemara says, no, that's different. That's a permanent structure. Permanent structure is aser da'iraisa, that's even if there's no roof. Temporary structures, and this is the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan allowed that if there's no roof, and they allowed it in a case like this where you needed to be able to make yourself a restroom seat, mishum covered, to allow a person to be able to be clean, so they allow that. Now, on the topic of making an OL, the Gemara says if you make it in reverse order, that is, first you place the thing on top, and then you put things under it, instead of first placing the bottom and then putting something across the top, so that's permitted. The Gemara gives a couple of examples. If you want to build wood in a shape that you could use to light a fire, meaning you want to set up a pile of wood where you'll have big pieces of wood with a space under it so you can light them. So you can do that, but you have to first hold the top one in place and then put things under it. You can't first put the bottom ones and then lay the top one across them. Similar thing would be if you want to use eggs to hold a pot up. You can't first place the eggs around and then put the pot on top. You have to first hold the pot in the air and then slide the eggs underneath. If you want to put a bed together, that would be made of legs with cross beams attached to them, and then a long cloth or leather skin stretched between them. You have to first hold the leather, then put in the cross beams, and only then bring in the legs. If you want to put a barrel stacked between others, if you want to stack barrels in a storeroom of barrels, and the way you have it is that you have a top barrel over the space between 2 smaller ones, 2 lower ones. You can't do that from bottom up. You have to first hold the top one in place and then slide the 2 barrels under it. And the Gemara will now get into discussing the wood and the door, but we'll save that for Daf Lamed Gimel, which is where we are.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.